Good evening, everyone. And tonight, let me just remind you, first of all, and I know some of you have been working on this already, the clause-based analysis will be due on the 10th. So please be sure to do that. And may I give you a word of advice about before you go on to step 2 and begin the theme analysis. After the due date, the following week, I will post my analysis, all right? And so I suggest that you would follow that analysis. I've looked at some analyses so far. I can see that there are some problems, and this is the time to get those fixed. But so that's why before you go on to step 2, it'll be due on the 24th, so there's some time. Next week, I will be posting a model, and I will announce that on Canvas and make that available on Canvas. So you'll be able to see my analysis of the text you're working on. Now, again, one of the things that I'm wanting you to keep in mind, one of the things that I want you to be sure to keep in mind, that is that what we're really interested in here is not just the data that we are getting as a result of our analysis. What we're wanting to discover is what gives this text value. Why did people respond the way they did? Halliday says we need to explain, we need to explain that value in terms of what we know about semiosis. Semiosis, how we make meaning, about meaning and how meaning is made. So this is what you will be working on in that final commentary, all right? Looking at what observations you discover, but it goes beyond the data. Now, the text that we're looking at, as I mentioned, I'm going through my analysis of the first audition that he made, and which successfully got him moved up into the live shows, as they put it. Remember, this was his spoken word performance that he gave in the audition, and that is the one that we are analyzing together, all right?
I have 2 facts for you. 1, I'm 6 feet tall. And 2, love is the most vulnerable thing one will ever have. And you must learn to hold on to it loosely, so when it leaves, it won't exit so painfully. On July 14th, 1996, an angel was brought to this earth. Her name, Danielle Marie Gibson, but I only know her as Puff. Her smile is as wide as the universe. Her eyes, they glimmer like the stars. She is my world and my sister. I, just 4 years old at the time, learned what it meant to love selflessly for on days in which my strength was but knee-high. Seeing her smiling face would make my soul fly. But on March 23rd, 1997, I've been ground-bound because she left Earth to go back home amongst the stars, right next to God, but I was left here to manufacture wings out of tears and broken dreams, yet I'm still haunted by these nightmares because I have a really creative mind. And sometimes it designs these alternate realities where she is still here, still alive, and all the things I wish we could have done are played again and again and again, and I'm tired of playing God because I gotta come to terms with the fact that my sister ain't never coming back. And that's the cost of love. Caring for someone so much that you can't imagine living life without them. Staring at a grave like, how about I trade my 6 feet for yours, but that's not real. And I know I said earlier to hold on to love loosely, so when it leaves, it won't exit so painfully. But if this pain and these memories are all that I got left of you, I won't never regret these scars from just trying to hold on to you.
Okay, now, I showed you this slide before. This was my analysis. And I've highlighted some things like clause embedding, rhyme, and so forth. You've been working on the clause-based analysis of another of his performances. What you will then subsequently be doing will be theme. So what I'd like to just briefly go through is, what is theme? I've already introduced this to you earlier, but let me just briefly go through it before I share with you my analysis of the theme structure that occurs in the first performance. We'll call it the golden buzzer performance. What is theme? Again, we need to distinguish that this is Halliday's terminology. If you have studied literature before, you will probably have a very different view of what is theme, and we see that even in Ruqayya Hassan in her analysis of when she talks about what is theme. Very different. Theme here and the theme analysis that we're doing means the starting, the departure point of the message. What is that significance? The significance of that is that it's very often what the speaker wants to talk about. It also fits this clause with what came before. There is a flow of information that is indicated by the choices of theme from one clause to the next. And over the course of the whole text, we begin to see how that text unfolds. Very often, theme identifying for us what that structure, that architecture is like. It's part of what we call textual meaning. It's the organization of the text. And it concerns a choice how you begin each clause. We said that theme is the initial grammatical element, not the first word, but the first grammatical element, which may be a word or it may be a phrase. Now, as we've seen, it can maybe even be a clause, as, for example, the grammatical subject. Focus is what takes on a kind of tonic prominence. It show through our intonation, we identify what we consider to be the new information. And so, as we've talked about before, in these examples on your screen, what's highlighted in yellow, the grammatical subject, John. And what we can say is this, that theme, I want to make the point here that every clause will have in it an experiential element. Otherwise, it won't be a clause. What do we mean by an experiential element? Three things, remember. Process, a participant, circumstance. Now, not every clause has a circumstance. Not every clause even has participants. But every clause, what defines a clause, is the process, the verb. In English, we use verbs to express the process. So what you need to identify is that first experiential element, that obligatory element that defines what is a clause. process, participant, or circumstance? What occurs first? John's already left. Yes, it's the grammatical subject, but it's also the first participant. He's the one that leaves. Yesterday, now that's a circumstance. We discussed the financial arrangements. His spirit, that's a participant. People who live in glass houses, that is a participant. Now, the participant may be a subject, it may be the complement, but what we're saying is, it is, above all, will include the first experiential element. I'll come back to that point, but I want to make a point about focus, and I'm going to, again, go back to Donald Jung and that speech that he gave. In that speech, I want you to listen here for his intonation. As you listen to the intonation, what you are seeing under, I have two columns here. One is theme and one is news. Notice what happens on the part that I've highlighted in blue, the news, so to speak.
Some of you may know that this year is also an important anniversary for China.
All right, now, did you hear that? An important anniversary for China. His intonation rises on that new information for China. Now listen to it again.
Some of you may know that this year is also an important anniversary for China. It is the 100th anniversary of the revolution that overthrew the Qing dynasty and ended millennium of dynastic rule. 100 years ago today, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the man most closely associated with that event, was making his way back home to China from the United States. He had been here in the US trying to raise funds for the further attempts to revolt in southern China. He was in Denver when the news reached him that the revolution had started without him on the 10th of October in Wuhan, a city in a conservative center of China. At one level, you can read that as a lesson on the need for humility, that those who seek to lead events must accept that often the events leads them. And at another level, it is a reminder of the power of ideas to move men to action well beyond the reach of those who had the ideas.
Now you can hear it sometimes quite strongly in Denver. That the event leads them. There's that high rise on what is he doing with his intonation? He's signaling to you the focus, the new information. So there are two things that are going on here. One is how you begin the clause, the starting point of the message, what you want to talk about. Relating that in terms of a kind of thematic progression throughout the text, which signals the coherent architecture of the text. Plus, you at the same time have a flow of information. Some information is what you already said, what is known to the listener, the reader. This is old information, it's given information. And then you have some information that is new. And that new information is likely toward the end of the clause, speaking in terms of English here, toward the end of the clause, and likely indicated by intonation. So two things indicate the focus: location and intonation. Now come back, and there have been some questions about, again, theme and what do you look for? Now let me suggest to you a strategy for how to deal with theme. First thing you do is when you see a sentence like this, "But Mary, I do love your cooking," identify the first experiential element. What is the first experiential element? It is I. It's not but, certainly. But is textual, it's a conjunction. Doesn't express process, participant, or circumstance. No, definitely not. Even Mary. Mary here is not expressing, it's not about Mary, it's being expressed, I'm addressing to Mary. And so the first experiential element, find the first experiential element. That is your ideational theme. Next, you look for what precedes it. And whatever precedes it is either going to be interpersonal, such as Mary, or textual. Find the first experiential element. Can't even say that find the grammatical subject. No, it may be a complement. His spirit they could not kill. Maybe the complement that is put first. Okay, so you're looking for the process, participant, or circumstance, that first experiential element. That is the idea. That is what it is about. And then whatever precedes it is serving either the interpersonal or the textual metafunction. All right, so that's my strategy. Now, yes, there are several special thematic structures, especially in English. Predication, it's John I want. Now there you're basically putting a clause first, but it's a predicated, we call it a predicated theme. And identification, what I need, that nominalization, that repackaging of a clause as a nominalization, now functioning in the role of grammatical subject, that is theme. And the other issue that you also have to pay attention to is how the choices of theme progress from one clause to the next. And we said that there were three sort of possibilities here. Linear, the focus of one clause becoming the theme of the next clause. I went to a hotel. It was very expensive. I went to a hotel. A hotel is the focus. It's the new information. It's at the end of the clause. I went to a hotel. I'm referring back to the hotel. And I'm using a pronoun because I've already mentioned it. It's now given information. I went to a hotel. The hotel is new information. But having said it, in the next clause, it becomes an it because you know what it is. And it becomes the theme of the next clause. That's linear thematic progression. Continuous. You keep repeating the same thing as theme. Derived, not necessarily the same thing, but something related. And I've gone through these, so I won't repeat the examples here. You can go back to the slides and go back and review it, but be familiar with what is linear thematic progression. What is, again here, what is continuous? As you go through the text, and as you are going through this analysis that you're doing now with the text that you have, that spoken word performance, you analyze this for theme, but be paying attention to the thematic progression. Now, some examples that I've given before, for example, in Malala, when she gave her talk, you notice the Taliban, they, the terrorists, was continuous, right? Again, she very often relies on sort of a continuous thematic progression as she proceeds through the text. We noticed what was important about her and what she was saying. We noticed that the first half of the speech, when we just looked at now sometimes we, by the way, it says here top 10 topical themes with pronouns, right? Topical, another way of talking about ideational, right? Sometimes it's called the topical theme. It's also the ideational theme, all right? So it's the same thing. Now, in her speech, the top 10 topical themes, we notice I stood out. In the second half, we stood out. And we saw that we actually could plot it in a way to show that the first half was very much first person singular. I was her personal experience. But then the second half of the speech was where she was addressing the audience, we together with her. All right, now come back to the text, that the spoken word performance. Let me go through this sentence by sentence. I have two facts for you. I, ideational theme. One, well, one is quite textual, all right? I'm 6 feet tall. So I have a textual theme. I've highlighted it in blue here. And two, love. Now, notice love is the most vulnerable thing. And now you'll notice 3B. I put it in square brackets. What does that mean? It means that it is embedded. Okay, remember this. Embedded clauses. What you've identified is a rank-shifted clause. You do not analyze. Because the whole point of putting it in square brackets is to say that it's now like the post-modifier thing. It is embedded within the noun phrase. It's sort of lost its clause status. That's why we say it's rank shifted. It's no longer functioning like a clause. It's part of a phrase. Now that's what the square brackets indicate. All right, so what do you analyze then? You analyze non-rank shifted clauses, like I have two facts for you, I'm 6 feet tall, love is the most vulnerable thing. These clauses are also finite clauses. They have a finite verb. What is a finite verb? Finite verb is a verb that expresses primary tense, present tense, past tense. Okay, that is a finite verb. I have two facts for you, present tense. I'm 6 feet tall, present tense, all right? The verb expresses the primary tense. We call it a finite verb. What is then a non-finite verb? Well, an ing verb is a non-finite verb. The to infinitive form of a verb, I want to go, to go. The to is what there? It's not a preposition. It is part of the to infinitive form of the verb, to go. All right? Now, we only analyze finite verbs, finite verb clauses that are non-rank shifted. Have you got those two sort of criteria? It must be functioning as a clause, not rank shifted, and it must contain a finite form of the verb, primary tense. All right, so that's why we're not going to analyze 3B. And you, and is textual, it's conjunction. You is the grammatical subject. Must learn, now 4B, to hold on to it. That is a non-finite form of the verb, right? It is a non-finite clause. We will exclude it from our analysis of theme. We will include it when it comes to analyzing for the different process types and so forth, but that's another story. Right now, we're working on theme. And theme is something that really we only identify in finite verb clauses that are not rank shifted. 4C, still part of the fourth sentence. So when, textual theme, it leaves. 4D, it won't exit so painfully. All right? Now, I think let's continue. Sentence 5. On July 14th, 1996, circumstance as theme. Now, what is theme then? It's that prepositional phrase. It is the first experiential element. It is the circumstance. What happened to the grammatical subject? Well, you pushed it out of the theme position. We say that the example here, an angel, notice I put it in purple, right? And I did that for a reason, because we're going to identify what we will call the displaced theme. The displaced theme, meaning it's been pushed out of its usual slot. Usually, yeah, you begin with the grammatical subject, but not here. This is the choice, and that is why it's meaningful. You put the circumstance first, and you push the participant as grammatical subject out of that initial, typically what we usually come to expect, that the grammatical subject will occur first, and that will be the ideational theme, but not here. All right? Was brought to this earth. Her name, Danielle Marie Gibson. There's no verb there, so I'm not going to be analyzing it as a clause. 5b, but, conjunction. I only know her as Puff. 6, her smile, ideational theme. Her eyes, they, now that is what we call an appositive. A-P-P-O-S-I-T-I-V-E. Appositive. What that means is you put two nouns together, side by side, they refer to the same thing. They are identical. We would take both of them together as the same thing as theme. Her eyes, they glimmer like the stars. 8, she, grammatical subject. 9, I, just 4 years old at the time, learned. 9b and 9c, we're taking that together as rank shifted, as embedded. It is a nominalization that is there functioning in learned what? Ten. Now this is curious, this one. All right, 10. For on days, now we have an embedded clause here as part of the circumstance, notice. For on days in which my strength was but knee-high. Now that whole thing is theme. It's the circumstances theme. It does include an embedded clause. But the circumstance, we're talking about 10a. For clause 10a, what is the theme? For on days in which my strength was but knee-high, circumstance, right? 10a, continuing, because now what is the grammatical subject? The grammatical subject is a non-finite clause. Seeing her smiling face, that is the grammatical subject. Here it is the displaced theme. Would make my soul fly. Now 10d, I don't see that as a finite verb, all right? 11, but, textual theme. On March 23rd, 1997, circumstances theme. I, grammatical subject, ideational theme. Displaced. The circumstances theme, the grammatical subject, the participant as grammatical subject has been, again, displaced. 11b, because she, because textual. She, grammatical subject, first experiential element. 11c, non-finite verb. To go back home amongst the stars right next to God. 12, but, textual theme. I, grammatical subject, was left here. 12b, to manufacture. Again, the to infinitive form of the verb, to manufacture, a non-finite verb clause. Now, 13. You have to notice here, we've been looking at rather simple clauses up until now. But notice 13 is so complex. We go from 13a to 13k. Now let's take a look at it. Yet, conjunction, textual, I'm. 13b, cause, textual, I. 13c, and, textual, sometimes, circumstance, it, displaced theme. 13d, rank shifted, embedded. And 13e, and, textual, all the things, and then embedded 13f and 13g. All the things I wish we could have done are played again and again and again. 13h, and, textual, I, tired. Embedded clause of playing God, 13j, cause, textual theme, I, and 13k is again embedded. You have so much going on in this sentence. It's also the sentence where we noticed that he really expresses his grief. There's a reason why the emotion is captured by a sentence consisting of a lot of complexity. "14, and that is the grammatical subject, that is referring to what was said, that's the cost of love." And then you'll notice 14b, ing clause. 14c, that, conjunction, you. 14d, ing clause. 14e, ing clause. 14f, like, I take it as a conjunction. How about, sort of as a question, so I'm taking it as interpersonal theme. I. Now, I'm not quite sure what I should do with the I here. Should I take the how about, I trade my 6 feet? Or is the how about is sort of expressing my an idea too? Now, one way to do it would be as I've done it. And I think in a way I probably, if I go back to look at this, I think I might put like as textual, how about as interpersonal, I is ideational. But I'm still struggling with that because how about doesn't just express a question, it also is questioning something. Why not? Isn't that sort of what it's expressing? So it does have that sense of an idea that gives a reason. A reason then might be considered an experiential element. Okay, so now what I'm telling you is that even as I go through an analysis, and you will find this as you do your analysis, at first it looks that it can be quite easy, and some clauses are quite easy. You can see an and but and that. But then you get to something like this, and we have to use some judgment in terms of what we're going to express about it. It does express as a question, so that's why definitely I would see it as interpersonal. I then could be taken as the ideational theme. There is some leeway here. There's some sort of argument to be made for both ways of seeing it. But be careful. It's not to say that theme analysis is something which is so flexible. 14G, there is no flexibility there. But is textual. That is ideation. For the most part, the analysis will be pretty definite. Perhaps sometimes there's a possibility of discussing it, maybe seeing another way to analyze it. Okay, that's how I would analyze the clause structure and the theme structure for this text. Oh, did I skip one? Sorry, I skipped the last sentence. And textual, I know, 15b, I, 15d, so when, textual, it, 15e, it. But if this pain and these memories are all, and again, I take that as embedded, 15g, I won't never regret these scars from that. The rest I would take as embedded. Okay, we've gone through this. I hope that you have a better idea how you will do the theme analysis. What I want you to do is I've given you that XL template on Canvas, and I'd like you to use that Excel file to put your theme analysis, okay? Don't give it to me as a Word document. The clause analysis, give me as a Word document. Yes, that's good. That's what I want. But for the theme analysis, for the next two analyses, theme analysis, logical analysis, transitivity, sorry, the next three, I want you to be sure to put it into the Excel file. Send me the Excel file, a copy of the Excel file. That's what you will submit for the theme part of the assignment. Okay, have we got that? All right, so this week, clause-based analysis. I expect most of you have finished it. It'll be due on the 10th, so in a few days' time, please be sure to submit on time. Submit the analysis. If as you're going through it, you find there's some difficulties going through it, do as well as you can. As I said to you before, you may make mistakes. There may be points of discussion in the analysis. How I will be assessing you for these tasks, step 1, 2, 3, and 4, is if I see that you have made a clear effort to do the analysis, that you have indeed completed the analysis, I will be giving you the full points. All right? So that's why I say to you that doing these 4 steps, very important, each one of them worth 5 points. In the end, you have 20 points. So it is an easy 20 points to get, as long as you do the work. And I've looked at some of the analyses that are there, and I've noted, in fact, not for everyone. I've gone through, I just noticed one, in fact, one analysis that I did want to comment on, and I did comment to that one. And I pointed out some of the issues and so forth. My point being here, I considered some of the analysis incorrect. And I believe that when you go through the analysis, I may find something similar on your point. Don't let that discourage you. You're learning through the process, all right? That's the main thing that I see here. You're learning to do this kind of analysis. And as you go through it, pay attention to the model that I will put up later. And please, again, for the following subsequent steps, 2, 3, and 4, use the model that I provide for you. Don't use what you have done yourself, all right? Go through and follow the model that I give you. And if you have questions comparing yours with the model, then also ask, all right? Do we understand each other? All right, I hope so. Now, the last part, you might say, well, if everyone's getting 20% and everyone does the work, then how are we going to be really assessed? Where are you going to be able to identify who's really the A student or the B student? That will come through in the commentary. In the commentary on the text, there I will be watching and observing what you have observed from the analyses. This is where really what you can observe out of the analysis and draw conclusions from in your commentary. What are you commenting on? What are you looking for? Why does it have the value that it has? Where did that value come from? What were people responding to? And just like that performance, spoken word performance that I have been analyzing, which we could see the judge's response, you can see the judge's response to that performance that you are analyzing as well. And again, each time that he did his performance, he's carried forward by the fact that people were voting, the public was voting him to continue. So people were responding very positively. And the spoken word performance that you are doing is obviously a very different topic than the first one. So this is the text that you're analyzing. We call it the Pookie text, all right? When I'm up here on stage, they call me Brandon. What do you have here? When I am up here on stage, that's one clause. It's not an embedded clause. That clause is a finite clause. It is expressing, it is related hypotactically with what follows. It sets the circumstance. When I'm up here on stage, they call me Brandon. It's two clauses together. One is a dependent clause and the other is the main clause. Now that's what I want you to go to analyze. 1A, 1B. At this point, that's what was the suggestion that I gave you when you began doing the clause analysis? Look for the verbs. Use the verbs to indicate to you what are the clauses that make up this text.
And he's got everything. America, just sit quietly, listen, take it in.
When I'm up here on stage, they call me Brandon. When I'm with my homies, they call me B, and when I'm with the ladies, let's just say they call me Taken because I'm already happily spoken for. But when I'm back at home, my mama, she called me Pookie. And no, I'm not afraid to admit it, my mother calls me Pookie at like the most inopportune moments. For instance, today, on my way here to America's Got Talent, my mom screamed out the front door, "Make sure that you call me when you get there." Pookie. And like, I get why my mother says it out of courtesy, but to be real, I don't understand why my mom's so concerned with my safety, praying for me as I leave the house on a daily, because I'm just a young man who has faith in Jesus. The same way that stars have faith that space will protect them from this galactic bully we call gravity, who longs to turn their stardust splendid spectacle for passerbyers to watch in awe of its depth. So yes, I never really understood the issue. And then I went on Facebook, and I realized that my mama loved me the same way every mother loved their son, fearfully. Because normally, death don't really bother me. I mean, I'm from Southside Stockton. I'm all too familiar with how some family reunions only ever take place on graveyard grass, and how a hole can be a safe haven for a soul in this mortal game of hide and go seek. But there is something so different about Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and the countless others. And as I stared at that screen, I couldn't help but think I was looking at a mirror image of myself being choked out for merely existing, or for daring to be more than 3/5 of what them folk thought them to be. Or maybe it was simply due to their hue, and in that moment I better understood my black mother's greatest fear was every time I leave her home, on the other side of my phone will no longer be her son, but be America's next most popular hashtag, accompanied by a video of her young star being gunned down by gravity as my stardust has turned splendid spectacle for passerbyers to watch in awe of my death. So yes, my mother's greatest fear is that I won't return home breathing, blood pulsing through these veins enough to still be her Pookie. And my mama warned me, son, don't you dare get caught at the wrong place at the wrong time with that wrong-colored skin, because those 3 strikes, they lead to pine box convictions, and I need you to return home my Pookie again. So dear Mom, I promise you this, I will do everything in my power to make it back home to you. But if I don't, just know you was the very last thing on my mind. And I will always, always be your Pookie.
Brandon Leak.
That was very, 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 very powerful, and I'm happy that you chose this platform to talk about what you just did. I think it is so important. Your spoken words, your honest words, your true words, your necessary words. Thank you. You're my favorite act of the night.
Sophia.
What a great way for us to end the night. It's something special, that talent that you have, and I really wish you the best luck tonight, because I wanna keep hearing you. I wanna see what you can bring next.
Howie.
Well, I gotta say, this is above and beyond anything I've seen, anything I've ever heard, especially at this time. It was so perfect. You took an older white guy and put myself into the body of an African-American mother, just hoping that her son survives life. And this is the conversation we're having now. This is the conversation, I'm not getting political, but this is the conversation that America needs to have. And there is no better, more entertaining, more woke, more educational way. I am so proud to be here in this room. I'm so proud that I pushed the golden buzzer. In my heart, you just won the whole night. You really did.
Okay. Now, I just noticed I've been looking at the chat while we've been going on, and there were some questions related. Let me just quickly respond to them. And Helen has asked about 3B. One will ever have. I've just been underlining the main clause, what should I call the main verb, all right? Not indicators of tense like will, all right? And another one you mentioned was 11, let's see, was, go back down, 11A. Again, I've only, well, yeah, I can see where I could be confusing here. because I put the ben here, and that is part of the auxiliary as well, and as well as the have. All right, I have been ground bound, and especially, I guess what I should have done was not. Well, I've been a bit inconsistent here. I can now, as I go back and look at it, yeah, I was left. That's the 12A. That was the auxiliary. Would make. Yeah, I can see I've been a bit inconsistent. When I was going through and underlining, what my main thought was that I wanted to identify the finite verbs, the main verbs. All right, I want to identify verbs, the process, and from that be able to identify what should be a clause. And the modality, auxiliary verbs indicating passive voice, will to indicate, again, a modality. These, to be consistent, I probably should be underlining together as part of that finite verb. But my real goal in going through the underlining was to identify the verbs here. And the verbs would be the main verbs. That was the main thing to identify. So I should be consistent one way or the other. Either I just identify the main verb, or I identify the main verb accompanied by its expressions of accompanying expressions of modality, or auxiliary verbs indicating voice and so forth. I should be consistent one way or the other. In your analysis, be consistent. All right? Main thing I would suggest to you is, first thing, identify the verbs, the main verbs. The additional modality, the addition of auxiliary verbs to indicate voice and so forth, those can be underlined or may not need to be underlined. Better would be that one is consistent in doing so. So forgive my inconsistency as I go through and as I see it here, all right? So I can see why the question would be raised. Are we quite clear then on what you're doing, the nature of the assignment? Now it's working on Canvas, so you can submit your assignments and work hard at it. Please try to really understand what you're doing. Making mistakes is not unexpected. Main thing I'm looking for is that you tried and you put the effort in. And of course, the better your analysis, the better your performance overall in the course, of course. All right, now we have, whoa, going through the first hour already. 7:53. Oh, I didn't plan on taking the whole first hour for that. So in any case, let's take a break then and come back at 7:53. So about 8:05. All right, 8:05. Let's come back. All right. See you then.
See you.
Any questions? Feel free to ask in chat. Okay. Okay, am I back on? And yes, I believe I am. I see a few questions. I've tried to address some of them, and I'll take a look in just a moment. I notice another one here about displaced theme. I'll come back to that. But first, I did want to draw your attention to what's on Canvas. And please be sure to look at the homework files, all right, that folder. And in the homework files, you will see the text you're analyzing. I'm sure you found it already. The I've included the video of him speaking, and also the Excel file, all right, which provides the template for you to do the analysis for the next steps in the assignment. All right, so please be sure to go check that out at Canvas. And now let me go back to this, and before I do, let me just respond. There was a question about what is theme. What Halliday is saying is that it is the first experiential element. There must be within a clause, there must be a process. There can be participants, can be circumstances. That is the ideational meaning, the experiential meaning. And that is fundamental to the makeup of the clause. Now, when that first experiential element appears, it will appear as a grammatical element. Now that first grammatical element is obligatory, all right? There will be a grammatical element, maybe the grammatical subject. It may be an adjunct as the circumstance, all right? It may be the verb as the predicate, in other words, as in an imperative. All right, so no problem with that. But what we do notice is that before this experiential element is mentioned, there is also the possibility that other things may occur before it, precede it. In other words, following from the other two metafunctions, the interpersonal, as I said, it may be an expression of modality, perhaps, certainly, something like that at the beginning. Perhaps John will go, or probably I will stay. What does that express? It doesn't express an experiential element, but it is occurring there at the beginning. So what Halliday is saying is, take that first experiential element. That's why I said begin with that. And then sort of there, draw the line. And then anything that occurs before it, well, what occurs before it will either be textual. It may be a combination of conjunctions. So when, as we saw in one of the texts before, it may be expression of modality as I expressed. It may be mood indicating a WH word indicating question, vocative, like as in our example. Do you get the idea? Theme is sort of a configuration of what occurs first, but very often, potentially, it can be all three metafunctions there, right there at the beginning. What are we doing? And it's very often textual, interpersonal, ideational. We relate to what we've said before. We relate to next to the person we're talking to, and then we say what we want to say. So that whole configuration is theme. That's what we mean. The other question was displaced theme. Displaced theme, what we're saying is that typically what occurs is theme. Typically, in a statement, in a declarative, it'll be the grammatical subject. English is a subject. We begin with a subject, right? Very often, that's sort of the default, the expected. But we can put something there at the beginning, which is the circumstance. When, indicating something about when, on such and such a day, I did this or that. Okay, so we can put the circumstance there at the beginning. In that case, what we've done is we've taken the grammatical subject and we've pushed it aside. It's not in that first It's not in that first slot, theme slot. It's not theme anymore. It really isn't theme. Halliday does give it a bit of status, though, by saying it's a displaced theme. It would be what you would expect to be theme. It is, now I'm going to use another bit of terminology here. It is the grammatical subject is the unmarked theme. It is the expected theme. It is the expected first grammatical element. But we can put something else there, an adjunct in that slot ahead of the grammatical subject, in which case that other element there in theme position is a marked theme. Okay, so his soul they could not kill. Now, we don't normally talk like that. That is quite marked. Putting the complement there at the beginning, we made a theme. His soul they could not kill. Putting his soul at the beginning there, that is more marked. Putting a circumstance there is a bit less marked, but putting the grammatical subject in the first position is the unmarked. Okay, so that's anyways, I think I've got to move on. All right, so I'm going to move on because I do want to cover something else besides your assignment and besides the theme. All right. Linguistics, language, and verbal art. We began this topic last week. We didn't finish it. I want to make some headway into it this week. All right. The point that Hassan was making is that there is a way to read a text as simply its verbalization, simply the text. And that's what I'm wanting you to pay attention to in the spoken word performances that we are analyzing. These are essentially poetry, and you can, of course, read it as simply just what he's telling you. But Hassan's point is that what indeed makes it poetry is what indeed makes it verbal art, what indeed makes it a spoken word performance, and what we've been looking at is that it goes beyond simply like the way we communicate or like the way I'm communicating now. I'm just giving you information. The verbalization, there's meaning, there's lexicogrammar, there's phonology, all there. But then, for those that are engaged in a kind of verbal art, whether it's poetry or spoken word performance or drama, these are where the artist is taking that use of language, that sort of flat level, think of it as sort of flat level of language, and turning it into signs having a deeper meaning. What is the process? Symbolic articulation. What does that mean? Articulating symbols. What are symbols? Symbols are metaphors. For Hassan, this is achieved in verbal art through something she calls foregrounding. What does that mean? I want you to be very clear on what is foregrounding, all right? Because I want you later to be looking for it in the spoken word performance that you're analyzing. First of all, foregrounding. Professor David Butt calls it mobilizing, employing the habitual patterns of grammatical choice, the typical ways in which we use language, turning it into a non-habitual consistency, turning it into a pattern that by its frequency of occurrence suggests that it's beyond what we usually encounter in language. It's just taking advantage of the way we actually just use language and turning it into a kind of patterned regularity that we probably don't normally observe. And the whole purpose of doing that is to create a default, a background against which the poet will foreground. And the whole purpose of that foregrounding is to communicate a hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. What is that artist? What message is that artist trying to convey? Now, the artist is conveying this message. Now, this is where I told you it can get a bit confusing, because she refers to this, because she came out of the study of literature, she refers to this as theme. Now, this, again, no relationship with what we've been talking about in the first hour. What we've been talking about in the first hour is a concept from systemic functional linguistics, which identifies the initial grammatical element, okay? Theme here is a hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man, some message that the artist is wishing to convey. Now, the point that she makes, and that is that it, as she puts it, it may not be what initially engages the reader. In other words, those people sitting there, those judges and the public that watched Brandon Leake give his spoken word performance on television, they may not have captured the theme. The theme is what's going to stay, she suggests, in the reader's consciousness long after the pleasure of encountering the artistic turn of phrases has dissipated, long after you've forgotten his wording. What is going to be remembered is that message, is his hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. So I would ask this then, in the puff text, in the golden buzzer performance, the one I'm doing, my question would be, what is this hypothesis? What is his hypothesis? What is he conveying here? In your text, the Puki text, what is the hypothesis that he is conveying? Now, again, as I mentioned this before, in this sort of comment made by this author, Lance St. John Butler, he's talking about Professor Hassan, and he's saying that she is a linguist who's involved in looking at the literary, but he's pointing out the fact that he believes, makes, as he puts it, an intriguing compromise between the linguistic gospel of Halliday, okay, and that's what we've been looking at, okay, and the special concessions needed to deal with the phenomena of literature. Okay, what are those special concessions? He goes on to say, now Hassan knows that, yes, a linguistic analysis, as he puts it, stylistics in action, can be a vast undertaking. Even a simple sentence can be required to be analyzed in terms of its semantic syntax, lexicon, phonology. Innumerable tables listing frequencies of tokens of different types from various levels of language. And that is what you're doing with your Excel file. You are coming up with your tables listing the frequencies in terms of what you observe for theme, what you will observe for logical meaning, what you will observe for transitivity. What kind of processes did he use? Who is the actor? Who is the initiator? All of these, yes, you're coming up with this. These are your data. But you cannot stop there. As Lance St. John Butler goes on to say, she rejects this method. It's not like you can just analyze the text and come out with your tables and your quantities. No, she objects that without any hypothesis, there must be the assumption that there is indeed a message that is being conveyed. What do you do with a hypothesis? You prove or disprove it. How do you prove or disprove a hypothesis? Here, we prove or disprove it, yes, based on our data. But the data itself must serve that purpose, to either prove or disprove a hypothesis. You cannot get any farther without the hypothesis. You see, what your commentary is going to be is your hypothesis about the hypothesis being put forward by Brandon Leak in his spoken word performance. What message did he have? You accept the fact there is a message, not just simply the words that are there. There's more, there's a deeper meaning, there's something more. How could anyone just get up there and speak for a minute and win America's Got Talent? There has to be something more going on. And that something more has a purpose. It has a function. It is not just the purely aesthetic, it is also the function. And the two together create this art. The theme of a work is a hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. As she puts it, and I will read this quote, "The patterns of language are so deployed as to take us in a particular direction. Each message is a message by itself." Now, when she says each message is a message, each clause is a clause by itself, but the totality of these, in other words, substitute clauses, because that's what she means. Each clause is a clause by itself, but the totality of these clauses enunciates a theme. The theme becomes accessible. The hypothesis of the writer becomes accessible by examination of the meaning of the individual messages. You are doing a clause-based analysis, guided by the repatterning of patterns. You're looking at the clauses. You're identifying overall the patterns. And then you will notice there is a repatterning. There is a foregrounding. If there is no foregrounding, there is no art. I will make that statement. Unless there is foregrounding, there is no art. A literary artifact is an extended metaphor. The poem, the spoken word performance, the drama, they are an extended metaphor. The whole piece is a metaphor. The whole piece is expressing, articulating some symbolic value. So, Russell Mears, again, I strongly recommend this book to you, not just and beyond taking this course on text linguistics. Just his insights are really very worthwhile to notice. The words of a poem, he says, are used in a symbolic way, having more than a single meaning. The effect of a few simple words combined in a particular way is to evoke a sense of reality that none of them possess alone. Now here, this is what you are interested in. Few simple words combined in a particular way. What's that combination? When you're talking about words that are combining, you are talking about grammar. And the argument that I'm putting forward here is that the way to identify what combinations there are involves issues of theme, issues of transitivity, issues of logical meaning. These, which are identified in a systemic functional approach, offer us an insight into how the text comes to mean what it does. Evoke a sense of reality that none of them possess alone. The nature of this reality is not precise, it is indefinite. Yes, it's open to interpretation. It's not just about words, it's also about wordings. When I say that it's open to interpretation, of course it has to be. That is the whole point. So it ends up becoming a metaphoric, cinematic screen on which is portrayed a partially glimpsed personal reality. What is the hypothesis of the verbal artist? A partially glimpsed personal reality. And it is portrayed as an extended metaphor in the poem, in the drama, in anything that we can identify as being art. We will be looking at some political speeches, and we will observe that there is indeed more going on than what's on the surface. Okay, it's not just the poetry.
In the end, it's been useful because I now see the structure of mind as like the structure of a poem.
Okay, yes. Would you say it's a healing prospect for you, writing poetry?
I would say it is, yeah, absolutely. And I became particularly interested in a poet called Wallace Stevens, who's a kind of not very well-known poet, but amongst critics, he's regarded as one of the three great poets of the English language in the 20th century. And he basically admitted that writing poetry through his life had a healing purpose. It was a therapeutic function.
This sociotherapeutic function, it's a healing function. The whole point of poetry, the combination of the aesthetic and the functional. This is what Mears is referring to, the structure of the poem. It has a message, but there is an aesthetic value that is also there. And the combination of these two have indeed a kind of therapeutic healing function. Hassan, that's what she says got her interested in studying literature. It's what she says is that she sees in literature that can make readers more human than they were before they came to read that literature. Can really change people's perspective on things. This is Professor Ruqaiya Hasan. I, along with two other colleagues in Sydney, interviewed Professor Halliday and Professor Hasan in their home. And this was her responding to how she saw the role of literature.
Well, I was always interested in literature, and up to the time that I did my own study, postgrad study at Edinburgh, up to that time, in fact, I went into that study because I was convinced of the therapeutic, sociotherapeutic function of the study of literature, that literature, the teaching of literature could be such that it could make the readers more human than they are before they came to reading that literature, you know. So I always felt that you could really really change people's perspective on things by teaching literature properly.
All right. All right, so it has a purpose, it has a message, and that message, hopefully maybe even a healing message. Halliday didn't really, he felt that there was a better way to describe this than foregrounding. He prefers another term, and the term is put forward by Jan Mucharovsky of the Prague School of Linguistics. The Prague School of Linguistics is famous for their analysis of literary language and the aesthetic function of language. But Halliday prefers Mucharovsky's term de-automatization. De-automatization. Since, as he says, what is in question is not simply prominence, but rather the partial freeing of the lower level systems from the control of the semantics so that they become domains of choice in their own right. To de-automatize means to try to interpret the grammar in terms that go beyond its direct realizational function. What the poet does is artistically create an automatization. Remember David Butt's way of saying it? Mobilizing the habitual patterns of language choice into a non-habitual consistency. And it's almost turning it into a pattern that becomes the expected. But then, against which the poet attempts to de-automatize. Foregrounding is what Hassan refers to it. Creating a pattern, basically, in order to break the pattern. Creating a pattern in order to break the pattern. So the question comes then, how do you distinguish between art and accident? Okay, let me put it this way. On the one hand, artistically intentional act of de-automatization or foregrounding. How do you distinguish between what the artist did by intention, creating a pattern and then breaking the pattern, or simply some linguistic phenomena that you can show statistically it occurs more often, so therefore is a pattern, and is though not at all part of the artist's craft and does not contribute to the overall meaning of the work of art. So how can you distinguish between what is art and what is accident? Foregrounding of a pattern depends on both contrast and consistency. Contrast. Let's look at what that means. We're going to do so in the context of a poem. The poem is The Widower in the Country. The poet is an Australian poet, Les Murray. And this comes from Professor Ruqaiya Hassan's Linguistics, Language, and Verbal Art. Linguistics, Language, and Verbal Art, I think I told you, it really influenced me a great deal. Because you see, I was like Simon Cowell in one of the judges for Brandon Lee. I didn't understand poetry. I didn't appreciate poetry. I didn't see the point. I thought it's just trying to make words sound nice. That was my view of it. I didn't like poetry. Didn't appreciate it at all. It wasn't until I came across her book, Linguistics, Language, and Verbal Art, that I began to see that there's more going on here than I realized. And that made me sit up and take notice. Okay, let's take this example then. Okay, let me read the poem to you, all right? I'll get up soon and leave my bed unmade. I'll go outside and split off kindling wood from the yellow box log that lies beside the gate, and the sun will be high, for I get up late now. I'll drive my axe in the log and come back in with my armful of wood and pause to look across the Christmas paddocks aching in the heat, the windless trees, the nettles in the yard, and then I'll go in, boil water, and make tea. This afternoon, I'll stand out on the hill and watch my house away below and how the roof reflects the sun and makes my eyes water and close on bright web visions smeared on the dark of my thoughts to dance and fade away. The sun will move on, and I will simply watch or work or sleep, and evening will draw in. Coming on dark, I'll go home, light the lamp, eat my corned beef supper sitting there at the head of the table. Then, I'll go to bed. Last night I thought I dreamed. But when I woke, the screaming was only a possum skiing down the iron roof on little moonlit claws. What's the poem about? The widower. He's lost his wife. And read that poem. It seems like he has a rather lonely, boring existence. All the routine. It's just his routine, his daily routine. Is that all that there is to it? It's just this guy, yeah, sorry that he's lost his wife, but I mean, we have a poem that basically is his daily routine. All right, now let's begin to look at this. And let's begin to look at it from the point of view of, we call it the system of transitivity. What is the system of transitivity? Process types. What are doing verbs? What are sensing, knowing, seeing, verbal, behavioral, existential, relational? Now you're going to be doing the same thing with Brandon Leake's Pookie, all right? You're going to be looking at the processes. You'll identify for each clause, what's the process? Who are the participants? And are those participants the actor, the agent, or are they the affected? Is it in a mental process the sensor, or what is sensed or known, the phenomena, and so on? And Hassan generalized it a bit. She said what we can do is we can look at who's in the ER roles. Okay, so we won't need to distinguish actor, sensor, sayer, behavior, but you'll notice they all mostly end in, well, OR, ER, sayer, behavior. Oh, so that's why she refers to the initiator of the action, the process, as being in the ER role, as opposed to the affected in the ED roles. And we went through this when we talked about Donald Jung and Susan Rice and compared their texts. Remember? All right, so she did her analysis and she identified the following participants in the ER role. The widower. There's one animate, that is the possum. There is an object, the yellow box log, for example. There is a reference to time. The sun, the evening are time related. and there was an event, one event, which is basically a verb turned into a noun, screaming, all right? All right, so what do we observe here? Well, obviously the widower is more frequent. That's obvious. So let me count them. Okay, the widower, I can see there's a, in terms of, a widower is an actor. Widower is censor. Now, if I take a look at what we observe here, in fact, the widower occurs obviously more frequently than the animate, the possum, which was once the object, the time reference. Out of that 27 occurrences of an actor engaged in some kind of doing process, 20 of those are the actor, is the widower. And the widower is the only one who's the censor here. And the widower is 7 times the behavior. Okay, altogether, the widower is in an ER role 28 times. Well, that's obviously the background. That's that we observe. So other than the widower occurring is what's foregrounded. Any other mention of anything else in the ER role is foregrounded. The background is what occurs most frequently. And it's the widower is engaged in primarily its doing. Now, if I go through and look at the various things that occur here within this poem, I can come up with these sort of conclusions about transitivity. Repeated material contrasting with other process types. In other words, repeatedly doing. The widower as the doer contrasting with other participants. Okay, these are the contrasts. Logical meaning. Logical meaning would be how the clauses are joined together. And what, I don't know if you noticed it, but as you went through it, there was a lot of and this, and then, and. So repetition of the conjunction and sets a background. Simple parataxis, clauses joined by and or and then. Simple clauses. Now that would contrast with some occurrences of complex clauses where you found parataxis and hypotaxis and rank shifting all in the same sentence. Now, do you remember Brandon Leake's golden buzzer performance that we were looking at a moment ago? You remember that we noticed that there was a lot of simple clauses at the beginning. But then we got to where it really became, where he really was expressing the sorrow that he felt, the emotion, where the emotion was coming out, where there was a great deal of complexity, complex clauses. Yes, with parataxis and hypotaxis and rank shifting all put together. Oh, I noticed that too there. But it's here in this poem too. The background is simple parataxis, using the conjunction and, as opposed to sentences where you notice that you had a combination of parataxis and hypotaxis. What is hypotaxis? Remember, dependent clause and a main clause? Rank shifting, those embedded clauses, where you would have sentences that had all three. Now that was foregrounded. Tense. Well, what's the tense as you go through the poem? Future tense. I'll do this, I'll do that. It's all future. But there are some occurrences of present, past. Not many. But again, what's the background? The background is the future tense contrasting with other tenses. The other tenses are where you notice the foregrounding. Theme. Again, here in the Hallidayan sense, widower is theme. The widower is I will do this, I will do that. It's the widower. So we see contrasts. We see a pattern where you have a lot of doing being done by the widower, contrasted with other participants. You have a lot of simple parataxis, clauses conjoined by the conjunction and, with very complex clauses. You have future tense, repeatedly used, contrasting with other tenses. You have the widower as theme, contrasting with other theme choices. You have these contrasts. And where you notice the contrast, you notice that there's a kind of foregrounding against the background. That's the contrast. But it isn't just about contrast. It's also about consistency. What's consistency? Professor David Butt, again, refers to this as a kind of, as he puts it, semantic drift, the manner in which an ensemble of features take the reader toward the same general kind of meaning. In other words, it's not just contrast this, contrast of that, it's where they sort of are coming together. They become an ensemble. You notice that it's not just about tense, it's not just about the logical, it's not just about transitivity, but you notice that they are all sort of happening together and in a particular location, some significant point in the organization of the text as a unity. There's some point at which these contrasts come together. So now, where there is this consistency of choices across several kinds of meaning, Professor David Butt describes this as the poem's existential fabric. It's weaving a particular fabric, it is the text itself. All right, where is this happening? In this text, then. Notice on the table on the right of your screen, we have the logical, we have process, transitivity, and we have theme. And what Hassan was pointing out was you have all these various contrasts. Where do they all occur? Sentence 10. With my arm full of wood and pause to look across the Christmas paddocks, aching in the heat. Notice the aching. Where else? The roof reflects the sun and makes my eyes water and close on the bright web visions smeared on the dark of my thoughts to dance and fade away. And the last three lines. Where there is not just a single contrast, but where the contrasts all sort of are woven together with a consistency and in a location that is drawing your attention to the aching. The eyes water and close. What's that? Tearing. Smeared on the dark of my thoughts. The darkness, the pain, the screaming. This is what the poet is drawing your attention to. It isn't just the routine. There's the pain. There's the darkness. the screaming that this widower feels, on the loss that he's experienced. The poet draws your attention. Hassan says this, she says, on one level, the poem is a realistic picture of personal bereavement and the meaning of bereavement. You know what means bereavement, right? The loss of someone. On another deeper level, the poem deals with the centrality of human relations for the preservation of a sense of humanity. What she's arguing is that Les Murray's, as she puts it, Widower in the Country, poignantly points to its theme concerning the essence of humanity. To be human, to be an individual, you need to be with others. What makes human existence sane? What protects it from nightmarish chimera is another's company. The loneliness. The loneliness, highlighting the need to be with others. So what is the theme? The theme, you could say then maybe, is need for others. Now that's what she believes is the metaphor, is the meaning, is the symbol that this poem represents. It is Les Murray's hypothesis about some aspect of the life of social man. This is her hypothesis. And what she has done then is to take a look at the various ways in which you notice these contrasts in the choices, and where there is a consistency, and where it seems to be drawing you to a particular point within that poem. You see, this is what really impressed me. That in fact, yes, the poet isn't just writing words in lines and sentences and so forth. There is what the poet is creating with the craft that the poet is using is really to create a pattern. And from the breaking of those patterns. So what is the automatic for this particular? It is the widower doing and what the widower will do in the future. But where that patterning, where that automatic is broken, where there is the de-automatization, and where that de-automatization begins to focus like a beam on that part of the poem, that's where the hypothesis is coming through. What is verbal art? It's the intervention of the writer in mobilizing the habitual patterns of grammatical choice into a non-habitual consistency. Time for a break. When we come back, we will take a look at another poem maybe you're more familiar with, The Road Not Taken. And we'll ask ourselves, what can we observe from this poem? Okay, so let's take a break now, and let me take a look at some of the questions that appear on the chat. All right, so let's take a break for, let's see, it's about 5:02, so 5 after again, please. 5 after. Okay, now I've had a few questions about this, and I can understand this is a difficult concept and why you might find it such. But I think, you can begin to see what is meant by this. Now, as we said, what's Hassan mean by foregrounding? It's foregrounded against a background. And What is that background? It's a pattern. Using some particular, some linguistic choices that you are making, that what makes them stand out is the way in which they are, the intensity with which they are used, their frequency, their pattern. And then the foregrounding is what we've said is that it was when the poet, for example, creates that sort of background. Think of it like this: the background is like the automatic, it's like the default. So in the poem that we just looked at, Les Murray's The Widower, what was the default participant? The widower. But there are others. What is the default sort of way in which clauses are joined together? And. But there are others. Those are foregrounded against the background. The automatic, and then the foreground is like a kind of de-automatization. Now, Halliday puts it this way: what is in question is not simply prominence. Now, what Halliday's point was that what is really going on here, it's not just that you're making something stand out. And that was the weakness that he felt in the word, in the choice of talking about it as foregrounding. Instead, he sees it as the freeing of the lower level systems from the control of the semantics, so they become domains of choice in their own right. What does he mean by that? He means something like what we looked at before. You have the semantics, you have meaning, and then you have the grammar, the wording. So things are nouns, relators are conjunctions, processes are verbs. That is the default. That is the congruent. That is the automatic. But as we have seen, with reference to what we've called grammatical metaphor, we can decouple this connection. In other words, the grammar, we can disconnect from the semantics. The semantics higher over it, but we can detach it and recouple it a different way, so that we can turn the processes into nouns and we can turn it into a kind of grammatical metaphor. So, in other words, what Halliday is saying is that poem is an extended metaphor that is created through this kind of de-automatization where the poet foregrounds against a background, but a grammatical metaphor is also the same thing. What is the metaphor then? What is the metaphorical? The metaphorical, he's saying, is this ability to de-automatize, go against the default, go against the automatic. There is an automatic in the grammar, and we can undo it, turn it around in a different way. So what is the poet doing? Artistically creating an automatization, exactly what we've observed here in terms of language. We make that connection, that automatic. Well, what the poet is doing in the poem is creating their own sort of automatic, their own sort of default. Well, this is the poem itself, and within this poem, within the world of that poem, this is the automatic. It is a pattern of choice, in the case of what we just saw. As I said, the doer is the widower. Largely he's doing. And we can take a look at it from the standpoint of the tense, we can look at it from the logical, we can look at it from the standpoint of theme. Who is in the role of theme? The widower. But then the de-automatization, the foregrounding, the breaking of the pattern is where the poet is trying to draw your attention. And it will be not just one of these, it will be a configuration It is a combination. All right, let me go on to take another poem. The Road Not Taken. Let's listen to the poem.
Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Okay. So that's the poem. What is the messages combined to create a meaning? What's the meaning of the poem? So Professor Hassan worked on this poem. So what I'm about to share with you are notes that she left behind. When she passed away, she hadn't finished her analysis. She just had notes from her analysis. She hadn't yet published a paper on this. She wrote on the note, she said, "My aim is to carry out an analysis of this poem using the tools of linguistics, and then to assess the nature of the finding. Practically, I shall be concerned with what light such an analysis throws on the nature of language and literature." She continues, "It is an automatic fact that almost any text can be described from different points of view. Each such point of view contributes to our understanding of the nature of that text. Literature is no exception to this rule. Rather, if anything, the variety of points of view is perhaps much greater. For instance," she says, "it is quite possible that if we examine Frost's personal life, his personal philosophy, this would relate in some way to the understanding of this poem that I'm going to talk about today." These were notes. She gave a presentation. These were her notes, though. She never published it. Equally, if the poem can be seen as a document in the context of Western culture of the 20th century, this may add a depth to it as a document reflecting a social phenomenon. So she's saying, yeah, we can look at it from the standpoint of the biography of the writer, their philosophy, the culture in which they were writing. All these points of view, all these different routes of focus on a literary text are valid and important. However, there is never enough time to carry out an exhaustive analysis of any text, be it literature or not, from all possible points of view. I've therefore chosen to do what I'm perhaps better qualified to do, namely to examine the language. In my analysis, I shall be concerned, this is Hassan writing, concerned mainly with the level of meaning and wording. Meaning and wording. I shall make no significant remarks about the phonological patterns, not because they are unimportant or in some sense secondary, but because even the exhaustive linguistic analysis of a poem requires several days, not just a couple of hours. So what's the theme? What is the hypothesis being put forward by the poet? And what is that hypothesis that we seek to discover? You see, this is the whole idea that what we're trying to do as a linguist, we're trying to discover the hypothesis. Believing that the means of doing so, the means of discovery, are there in language. Will we cover everything? No. When you analyze this, the text that you're looking at with Brandon Leake's Pookie text, you're looking at it from transitivity, logical, theme. Is that everything? No, of course not. But it is a beginning. It gives some insight.
Now another edition.
Before I get to that, I want to ask, what is the theme? What is the hypothesis? Now, I want you to listen to the next video.
Now another addition to our NewsHour bookshelf. We look at a new take on a long-admired American poem. Arts correspondent Jeffrey Brown has that.
Two roads diverged in a yellowed wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler, long I stood. The first lines of one of the best-known American poems by one of the nation's best-loved poets, Robert Frost. It's called The Road Not Taken, and that's the title of a new book that calls it the poem everyone loves and almost everyone gets wrong. Author David Orr is poetry columnist for the New York Times Book Review and joins us now. Welcome to you. So it's read as a kind of pay on to individualism.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why you see it in so many graduation speeches. That's why you see it in commercials. I mean, there's no company in the world that would put the poem up as part of their commercial if they knew what the poem is more likely to mean.
Which is what?
Okay, which is what? I mean, in other words, you notice the title of this guy's book, that the poem that everyone gets wrong. And he's more or less implying that there is a meaning to this poem that everyone gets wrong. Well, this is how Ruqayyah Hassan saw it. The point to be made here is that the poem itself is whatever it means to you, the reader. When the poet writes it, it's what is there for you, the reader, to understand. And that is really what makes a poem live. What gives it and a poet that I'll be analyzing later, which is Edwin Tumbu, says kind of immortality, that the poem just never dies, because the poem, every time you read the poem, it means something to you. I'll share with you a little story. When I was before I came to Hong Kong, I was teaching at the National University of Singapore. And the head of the Department of English Language and Literature, the dean of the faculty, is a very well-known poet. He's said to be Singapore's the father of English language poetry in Singapore. When I left Singapore to come to Hong Kong, and I was teaching a class, sociolinguistics, and this poet, his name is Edwin Tumbu, he had written a poem called Language is Power, and I really liked the poem. And so I asked him if he wouldn't mind to come to the class, my last lecture, and read the poem to the class. And he said, sure, he'd be happy to. So on the day of the lecture, I went to his office to escort him to the lecture hall. I mean, classes were really large, around 200 plus students in this lecture theater. And so I escorting him there to the lecture hall. And on the way, I said to him, Professor Tumbu, if you don't mind, after you finish reading the poem, would you mind explaining the poem tell the class what it means, what it's about. And he looked at me with the sternest face I've ever seen. And he said to me, "You never ask a poet to interpret his own poem." Well, I felt really embarrassed. In a way, it was good that that was my last day and last lecture there. No, we ended up very good friends. But the point was, I honestly, at that point, I didn't really know why he took such offense at this. But you see, I've come to understand it. Because once the poet interprets the poem, that is the poem. That is what it means. You can't pick up that poem and say, "Oh, I think it means this," or "I think it means that." No. No one can do that except the poet. And as long as the poet doesn't do that, it continues to mean whatever it means to those that read it. And it lives. It continues to live. Because it lives to mean. And that meaning continues on. And that's what the poem ought to do. And come back to this poem. What does the poem mean? We can only come up with a hypothesis. We only can come up with a theory, what we think that what it means. We will attempt to try to understand it. We will try to discover what that meaning is on the basis of how language is used. Hassan says, for Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, read with an understanding of its deepest message, will leave an impression of the theme in her sense, okay, literary sense, which she takes to be the immutability of human choice, made lightly because through the thick curtain of the present it appeared less than momentous. The realization comes too late that the lightly made choice has made all the difference. Okay, so let's look at her analysis. Now, you'll recognize some of these: the actor, the agent, with the goal, the sayer, with the addressee, the actor as medium. That would be in a intransitive verb, okay? The river flowed. The river is the actor, but it's called the medium. It's only that single participant. A sayer without an addressee. A behavior. There was a question just a moment ago about what does it mean to be a behavior? What's the difference between that and an actor? And we usually, Halliday makes the distinction between doing and behaving in the sense of a behavior is also a kind of single participant process, but engaged in some physiological kind of activity, sneezing, sleeping, and so on. The censor, or the one who knows, the carrier. Now, there was a question also, what's the carrier? In the sense of, in a relational process, Tim, I gave the example just now on chat, Tim is thin. Tim carries the attribute of thinness, okay? Supervention, that's a new one to me as well. I'm not quite sure what she meant by it. Beneficiary, the one who receives. The goal, the one who is affected by it. And these would all be the second participant, all right? What she's suggesting is that when you put these, you can almost arrange these on a sort of a cline, a continuum, ranging from the more dynamic to the less dynamic. So in terms of this poem, what do we actually see here? Well, we have the actor as the agent with the goal, took the other. The actor is a medium, two roads diverged. A sayer without an addressee telling this. The censor, I doubted. The carrier, it was grassy. Now, these are all examples from the poem. Now, I think you can see an actor who actually carries out an action on something else is more dynamic than it was grassy. All right, describing the with a relational kind of process. Okay, some attribute that's not so dynamic. So she's arranging these in order of, again, this is her sort of hypothesis, or arranging these in this particular manner from dynamic to non-dynamic, because she believes that it makes a point within the poem. So let's go through the poem and let's take the verbs that are here and let's sort of identify which are the actor as a medium, two rows diverged, those that are telling as a sayer without addressee, those that are in red would be the actor with a goal, and so on. Okay, I've sort of highlighted what you can see here. All right, now let's sort of take a look at how she did the analysis. So she took the participant, the I, first of all, and she identified it in terms of the I as an actor. The actor in terms of as a medium, travel, stood, come back. It's basically single participant. Took, kept, both of these as a kind of doing, the I as an actor, and then ranged down below, censor, behavior, and so forth. Her conclusion was this: the non-dynamic nature of the protagonist. The I is not really that dynamic. We only have two verbs here. One verb is used twice. The only real dynamic action that he makes is taking the road, the choice. Everything else is rather non-dynamic. Now, the road is also largely the medium, again, in a single participant or in relational processes. Again, the roads also basically exercise no effect. They just simply are. They are the medium. They are not an agent. So far, in terms of dynamic processes, it's only the I, and that only refers to the choice that's being made. In other words, she's designing, I mean, what Hassan is doing here is, in terms of automatic and de-automatization, she's noticing a sort of an automatization of non-dynamic activity. And against that, where the foregrounding is in terms of what? Choice. The choice itself is the only dynamic action that is being made here. She continues, the universe that is being set up by this poem is one in which a dynamic role does not appear to be assigned either the I of the poem or the roads. Both appear equally incapable of affecting the world around them, except the choice. Now, when it comes to other, now this is curious because here we really see an example of grammatical metaphor. When we have, though, as for that, the passing there, is the passing who? Who's passing? We don't know. And it turns the verb into a noun, so it's no longer the activity. Instead, it's an event, the passing. And again there, and both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step. Again, we don't know who, no step had trodden black, no step. Again, a noun. So the actions here of wearing down the path and trotting on it are all expressed as nouns, so that there is no sense of activity. The environment, as she describes it, is influenced by anonymous. It's anonymous. There's no one identified as passing down this path. And there's no one identified in terms of wearing it down through their steps. No, it is anonymous, faceless beings. The only effectual thing where there is some dynamic activity, it is done by total anonymity. Timeless. It has no sense of time. In other words, it's a kind of grammatical metaphor that's being employed. The only thing where your attention is drawn in terms of a choice taken out by someone you can identify is making the choice. All right, now there's also other aspects going on here. The poem really divides into two halves. Now, Hassan, when she did her analysis, she looked at the sort of logical structure for this particular poem, and she identified for the first half. She only did half of it. She didn't do the other half. I'll do the other half in a moment. But she had split that first half into three parts. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood. And sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, and three parts. Interestingly, the job of doing the second half is much easier because it's completely punctuated as three parts. I kept the first for another day, exclamation mark. Yet knowing how way leads to way, I doubted if I should ever come back, full stop. And the last sentence. Three sentences. Now, the point being, there is a symmetry here. There's a balance here between the two halves of this poem. Well, the two halves, two roads, equally balanced, equally symmetrical. The choice is there. Notice again the sort of the symmetry here. Two roads diverged in a wood. At the end, it goes back to the beginning. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Then took the other. Again, reflected at the end there. At the end, it sort of summarizes. It comes back to the choices that were made and which were already raised within the poem. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Sum up, two alternatives are there. We can see the attributes of these two roads. There is no choice but to choose. But there's no real basis for the choice. One road, the other road, both roads equally lay. The choice is imposed by the fact of their existence. The choice taken blocked out the other. The consequence of a forced choice, however, are everlasting. I shall be telling this. What's this? Two roads indistinguishable, the taking of one without any real justification. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. But do you notice that last line? That. What's that? That. The choice has made all the difference. It is a very explicitly indicating a process of creating. That has made all the difference. The choice. The choice becomes so foregrounded. The choosing. The immutability of human choice. Made lightly because through the thick curtain of the present, it appeared less than momentous. The realization comes too late that the lightly made choice has made all the difference. You can see it, the literary artifact. This poem is an extended metaphor. What I want to go on to do is, because I was inspired by looking at Hassan's work, I was inspired to analyze the poetry of Edwin Tumble. I just introduced him a moment ago. So, Edwin Tumble, father of English language poetry in Singapore. In fact, he's visited Hong Kong several times. I invited him to City U, but the School of Creative Media also here at City U invited him. In fact, they did an exhibition of his poetry, which then they put on that exhibition in Shanghai. This was a few years ago, and which so Edwin's poetry has been received very well. And I don't know if any of you have been to Singapore. If you have been, you must have seen the Merlion. It's the iconic sort of symbol of Singapore. Well, if you did happen to see it, or if you ever do get to Singapore, when we can travel again, if you get to Singapore, look in front of the Merlion. You'll see a plaque standing in front of the Merlion. And on that plaque is a poem, Ulysses by the Merlion. It is written by Edwin Tumble. Edwin Tumble's approach to looking at language is really interesting. He, of course, is trained in literature. He's a poet. And for many years at the National University of Singapore, they only taught literature, not language studies, not linguistics. But when he became head and the dean, he brought in linguistics. He has a real respect, we can say, for language. He says this: I'm looking at language as part of my life, trying to create, to make my poems, putting language together. Technique, he continues, is all about poetry in the making. The chiseling of language, the rearranging of language, the sound, the rhythm, the tautness, the layering. We're going to look at a few of his poems and my analysis of his poetry. The first poem, after being introduced to how linguistics can deal with poetry through the work of Ruqaiya Hassan, especially her book, Linguistics, Language, and Verbal Art, I wanted to attempt it myself. And so I took this as the first poem I analyzed. And the title of the poem is Gods Can Die. We don't have a lot of time. Let me see if I'm debating whether I'm going to go through. In any case, I'm going to have you listen to the poem, okay?
Gods can die. I have seen powerful men unto themselves keep two realities, one for minor friends, one for the powers that be, the really powerful. Such people take a role supporting managers of state, accept an essential part in some minor project. But after a bit of duty that makes them fester with intentions, they play the major figure to old friends. We understand and try to seek a balance in the dark, to know the private from the public monument, to find our way between the private and the public argument, or what can be said, or if a thing is meant, or meant to make amends, is generous or mean. The casual word, the easiness, the quick straight answer, the humane delay, the lack of cautiousness that give ample laughter to our evenings are too simple for these days of power whose nature is to hint, not state. So when one has a chance to talk, the conversation hesitates on the brink of momentous things. He ponders, suggesting by some unremark there was much more to be said. It's a pity. Good men who seek to serve bind themselves unto a cause, then use the fate of nations as a rationale to take their friends aside, to lead themselves into some history. We gain uncertain statesmen, many lose a friend. But I am glad that others are powerful with compassion, who see before we do what troubles us, and help in kindness, take ignorance in tow. If not for such, we lose our gods who lived, but now are dying in our friends.
Edwin wrote this poem for a friend who had gotten involved in politics and government, and you can see sort of what happened to their relationship. It was in a way sort of a complaint against his friends turning into someone else because of his power and authority. What we do see in this poem, that there is a great deal of symmetry, there is a great deal of duality. You see a lot of pairs and also comparing items of equal status. Lexically, in terms of words, you see a lot of contrasting pairs. You major versus minor, private versus public, generous versus mean, gain versus lose, live versus die, hint versus state. So you have these contrasting pairs, these opposites. There is this sense of duality, truth, falsehood, good, evil, life, death. And so the poem itself is constructed in such a way as to be very paratactic. You remember what parataxis is? When you combine clauses and combine ideas with, and they're of equal grammatical status, there's balance. And so this is repeated throughout the poem by a lot of apposition, where you see two nouns together, both of equally identifying the same thing, same person. Opposition, the contrast, And then you have addition, negation, alternation, addition. You have and, alternation, or, and so forth. So you have a lot of parataxis, things in twos. Powerful men undo themselves. Good men bind themselves. The opposites, undo, bind. The relaxed spirit of our evenings contrasted with these days of power. So there's this background, there's this sort of automatic of symmetry, duality, pairs, comparing, but there's an undercurrent of confusion also. Can gods die? Lt was interviewed, and in the interview, the person asked about it, and he explained that the term gods refers to humanistic impulses, the goodness in man. And he goes on to say this: I believe that ultimately man makes and unmakes his destiny, depending, now here is the key, depending on which side of him prevails. Which side of him prevails. When we look at the nature of the different participants and what they do and so forth, you'll notice that the we, what is the we doing? That's the poet and us, the readers, right? Understand, seek, know, find. Well, basically, rather more mental kinds of processes, except for that pairing of gain versus lose. Powerful men, these in which group his friend belonged, notice their activity: undo, keep, take, accept, play. And then there's the one noun that stands out: fester. What does fester mean? You know, when you have an infection and it begins to get all pussy and swollen like that, that's festering. An infection festers. It's not nice, okay? Now, I want you to notice something as we go through the poem. I have seen powerful men. Well, what about the powerful men? Powerful men undo themselves, keep to reality. So we have a pair here, all right? Two things side by side, paratactic. Keep to realities. Again, one for minor friends, one for the powers that be. Another layer, two things that are paired together. One for the powers that be, and then an appositive, the really powerful. So we have layer upon layer of parataxis. Again, such people take a role, supporting managers of states. Such people accept an essential part in some minor project. So altogether, it's been, up till now, paratactic, but then the poet breaks that. But after a bit of duty that makes them fester with intentions, dependent clauses, they play the major figure to old friends. So what is the background? What is the automatic? The automatic is the paratactic, the symmetry, the duality, the pairing. And when that breaks, when it becomes hypotactic, where you have one main and one dependent, imbalance, asymmetrical, that's where you'll notice he is especially highlighting what has become of his friend. We understand and try to seek a balance in the dark. Again, another layer: to know the private from the public monument, to find our way between the private and public argument, to find our way between the private and public argument, or what can be said, or if a thing is meant, or meant to make amends, is generous or mean. Again, layer upon layer. Symmetry, parataxis. He then has a list of things: the casual word, the easiness, the quick, straight answer, the humane delay, the lack of cautiousness, and on until we get to, again, he comes back to the hypotaxis. Now, when you read it the first time I read it, I was reading that line, so when one has a chance to talk the conversation. I didn't realize as I'm reading, because it's not punctuated like that, that really the conversation is the grammatical subject of the clause that begins with the verb hesitates on the next line. So you sort of misread that line. So when one has a chance to talk, then you realize that you've said it wrong, and that the conversation is really the grammatical subject of the next verb, the next clause on the next line. What do you do then? You hesitate. Exactly what he is describing here. And then he makes you do that as you read the poem. So when one has a chance to talk, the conversation hesitates. The conversation hesitates. You are made to do exactly what he is describing here. And again, where he is identifying what has become of his friend, the change in their relationship, the change in his behavior, that comes through in the hypotaxis. Gods can die. The gods referring to these humanistic impulses. Man makes and unmakes his destiny depending on which side of him prevails. The hypotaxis draws your attention to where that side of him, that side of his friend, which was no longer a good relationship. And that is where he's drawing the attention through the use of hypotaxis. The duality apparent in this text, personality. I'm describing the text as having a personality. The duality apparent in this text, personality, to use Halliday's word, apparently reflects the poet's feelings about his friend's personality, which he judges to be two-faced and hypocritical. The poet's frustration, his disdain for what power has done to their relationship, is made evident through the foregrounding of elements that disturb an otherwise balanced state. The hypotaxis disturbs the asymmetry there, disturbs the symmetry, the balance that has been maintained otherwise. The choices that the poet is making to identify through the choices of lexical words and grammatical structures to put forward the idea of symmetry and balance and duality, and then where that is broken, that represents the meaning that he is conveying. That is an interpretation. That is a hypothesis about the poet's message. What the poet is saying about some aspect of the life of social man, that when you get powerful, power corrupts. Okay, that's one of the examples, and I know, a bit over time. When we come back after the Chinese New Year break, the first poem that I'm going to discuss with you is this one, Tumbu's David. You'll notice that the poem is written and he dedicated it to me. I had analyzed his poem, Gods Can Die, and then after I left Singapore, I came to Hong Kong, he sent me this poem and he had dedicated it to me. I was very interested to discover then, what is the message in the poem? What was the poet saying to me. There's a line in this poem, some metaphors for us. I wanted to discover the metaphors. So I'll take you on that journey of discovery the next time when we meet. I hope you all have a very happy Chinese New Year. I hope you have a very good holiday. Be sure to finish before the 10th, by the 10th, your assignment for me. And next week, please look up and I'll let you know on Canvas the model that I'm putting forward for that same clause analysis. All right, so bye-bye and have a very good, happy Chinese New Year.
Thank you. You too, Dr. Webster.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Have a good break.
You too. Okay, good night, everybody.